Being in compliance is something that a lot of Amazon sellers miss. There's certain rules that are required when importing, certain safety standards that a lot of products have to go through. And honestly, a lot of Amazon sellers drop the ball on this one. So I've invited my friend Fredrik Gronqvist, who's based in Asia, and he runs a company that helps sellers with compliance. And he's going to be talking about a lot of the things you need to be thinking about when it comes to making sure your product that you're importing into Amazon or even into other places in the United States or into Europe, it meets all the rules and all is in full compliance, so you don't have any issues down the road. So enjoy this module. It's some very important information you need to be very aware of.
Hey, my name is Fredrik, and in this presentation I will introduce you to compliance requirements, meaning product certification, labeling requirements, and lab testing from the perspective of an importer and Amazon seller. An introduction to compliance requirements in the United States. Okay, so the objectives in this presentation is to introduce you to the very basic concepts of compliance and product safety. I will assume that you know nothing about this topic. A brief overview of the various requirements in the US that apply to a broad range of consumer products. Amazon requirements and the way that they approach product compliance and verify compliance, which is very important these days, and a look at the practical implementation of product compliance from your perspective as an importer or Amazon seller. Right, so we're looking into CPSIA, FDA regulations, FCC regulations, textiles, country of origin, and more. We're not covering every single requirement, every single labeling or certification requirement and so on, but it will give you a comprehensive overview. All right, that's me. You can see that on the right. So my name is Fredrik. I'm originally from Sweden, moved to mainland China, Shanghai to be specific, in 2009. And started working in sourcing and manufacturing, you could say supply chain, covering everything from, as mentioned, sourcing to quality assurance, product development, and so on. And that's the reason I got involved with product compliance related matters. So that's my background. Currently based in Hong Kong, I am the co-founder of the company that operates Compliance Gate. Right, so let's get to it then. The very basics. Product compliance can essentially be broken down into these four parts. It is safety standards and substance restrictions. We tend to refer to that sometimes as technical compliance. This means, for example, you take these toys, for example, these teddy bears, which must comply with certain ASTM standards. They should also not contain certain substances, could be lead, cadmium, phthalates, above certain limits. That's about ensuring that a product is designed for compliance and its materials are also compliant, inherently compliant. The second element is documentation requirements. This could be product certificates, user manuals, permits, in many cases documents that you yourself will issue as an importer Amazon seller. Could also be referring to lab test reports, which are directly tied to number 3, testing and verification requirements, meaning is it mandatory to get the product tested? And if so, which entity is allowed to carry out this testing procedure? Number 4, labeling requirements. This is referring to, country of origin labeling requirements, textiles labeling requirements, traceability requirements, and so on. Different labeling requirements for different products. Now, this is, of course, simplified. It is more complex than this in reality, but this will give you a pretty good understanding, solid foundation anyway, for making sense of what all these requirements actually mean. Okay, So what does compliance, what does non-compliance mean in practice? What does it mean to have a non-compliant product? Well, it could be a missing or incorrect label. Perhaps I'm selling t-shirts and that t-shirt doesn't have a textiles label, meaning a fiber composition, care instructions, and so on. Okay. B, it could also be products that don't conform with substance regulations or safety standards. It could be that I'm selling a toy that which materials contain excessive amounts of phthalates or certain heavy metals, at least above the limits. C, it could be that you're lacking documentation is you should have received from an outside party, say a permit. Or it could be that you have failed to self-issue certain product certificates. D, that you cannot provide verifiable lab test reports. That's another risk. Okay, so what I'm trying to show you here is that a product can be technically compliant, meaning safe in every way, but if it's not correctly labeled, tested, documented, it could still be non-compliant. It can still be pulled from Amazon. You need to cover every single element. Right, these are the basics. Now, how is compliance enforced? Which entity could reach out to you and request some sort of evidence? Well, it could be the customs, market surveillance authorities, meaning government bodies, or well, government agencies as they are called in the US, such as the CPSC, Consumer Product Safety Commission. What's more common these days, at least for our customers and our readers, is that Amazon is suspending their accounts with these listings in case they cannot provide compliance documents. Or even customers, but that could also be retailers, not necessarily individuals, asking for compliance documents. Okay, so let's look into some of the regulations that apply to a range of consumer products. Number one, we have CPSIA, which covers all children's products age 12 and below. And this is very comprehensive. Number one, you as an importer or manufacturer, you need to ensure that your product is designed to comply with certain ASTM standards and other CPSC rules. This covers everything from the length of drawstrings to small parts and sharp points and so on. It's important to actually buy these standards and have a thorough understanding of what these means in practice. Number two, you need to arrange lab testing. Not just any lab test report will do, but it has to be one in your company name and issued by a CPSC accepted lab. They have a database you can search on the website. Naturally, the lab test report is a mandatory document, not voluntary. And you will then self-issue a CPC or a children's product certificate, which is based on the data in the lab test report. You also need to create label files, tracking labels, small parts warning in some cases, and for certain so-called durable children's products, you also need to issue a prepaid product registration card so that your customers can actually register the product by filling in this card and sending it back to you. Okay. FDA. So FDA, let's say they oversee various food contact material rules, meaning, well, FCM refers to materials that are in direct contact, in most cases with food or beverage. This could be kitchen products, food packaging, or well, related items. And I'm not going to go into the specific regulations here, but broadly it can be said that these rules, which apply to different types of materials. It could be stainless steel or plastics or even coatings and paints. Set restrictions, meaning bans or limitations on certain chemicals and heavy metals. They also restrict the migration of these substances, which is something that's quite unique for FCM, given that the material characteristics change when you put, say, a plastic lunchbox into a microwave oven. Should not be a situation in which substances migrate into the food or the beverage, and lab testing is necessary for the sake of verifying compliance. Okay, FCC. So FCC is also a government agency. They oversee various regulations that cover electronics, more specifically communication and interference, not necessarily electrical safety. So the FCC rules more specifically cover what is defined as intentional radiators. And this is a device that is essentially, well, it is radio enabled, meaning that it's Wi-Fi, 5G, GPS, Bluetooth, LTE, etc. Enabled. It is designed for wireless communications, but it also covers so-called unintentional radiators, and this is ultimately based on the clock frequency of the device, or the CPU speed, but it can broadly be said to cover anything with a chip, including USB enabled devices. So it's not just for radio enabled devices. So what does this mean? Well, you may need to self-issue, as was the case of CPSIA, self-issue a supplier's declaration of conformity, required for most devices classified as an unintentional radiator, and lab testing is also necessary for the sake of ensuring compliance. You will likely need device labeling, meaning the company name, address, SKU, batch ID, compliance statements, and in some cases also a FCC device ID. I could do an entire tutorial only about FCC requirements, different pathways to compliance depending on the hardware. Okay, now remember I mentioned that FCC doesn't cover electrical safety. That's where UL comes in. So UL, or Underwriter Laboratories, I think they have been around since the early 1900s. And they develop standards in the United States. Well, they can be applied anywhere, primarily for electronics. That's at least what they are famous for. They're more known for them. And these are, at least in theory, voluntary, in the sense that compared to, say, CPSIA, that's mandatory. And so is FCC compliance and FDA compliance and so on, okay? But UL, they develop standards and these are voluntary. Now, keep in mind that Amazon, they make it mandatory for certain electronic products. So it's still highly relevant for you as an importer. If you sell on Amazon in the US, if you sell electronics in particular, it is relevant to assess which UL standards apply to your product, and also ensure that your products are tested according to these UL standards. Okay, now for wooden products, wooden handicrafts, there are additional requirements. You can find a very detailed list on the APHIS website, but they define carvings, boxes, furniture, kitchenware, and so on as wooden handicrafts, which require that you obtain a pre-import approval, which in turn specifies the sort of treatment, be it heat treatment or fumigation, is required before you can import such wooden products into the United States. And the reason is to prevent the importation of certain pests, bugs and fungi and so on that could be present on or inside a wooden product. It is a bit more complicated than that. They also publish lists of approved suppliers, which is quite unique, but very detailed information on the website. Okay, textiles labeling, it's pretty straightforward. You need to create a label file. You need to include import and manufacturing information. It's practically required for most consumer products, not just textiles. You need to specify the fiber composition, could be 100% polyester, cotton, whatever it is. Care instructions or ASTM care labels. It cannot be just any care label. If you choose to go with these symbols, then they have to be ASTM. English language, you can add other languages. There are some exemptions, I think belts. Could be a few more. In addition, this also the Flammable Fabrics Act, which applies to, well, you could say certain thinner fabrics, lighter fabrics. We should definitely ask a lab to make an assessment for you. Okay, country of origin labeling. This applies to all consumer products, basically, in the US, made in the United States, made in Germany, or more commonly these days, at least for Amazon sellers, it's made in China, could also be made in Vietnam and so on. Well, the trick here is it must actually represent the manufacturing country. So repacking or transshipping a product does not mean that you can, say, turn a made in China product into a made in the United States product. Doesn't work like that, obviously. We keep receiving a lot of questions about that. There is at least one exemption, and that's for watches. Could be more, in which case you specify the movement manufacturing country, which is often Japan if you say a citizen movement, or Seiko or Ronda in the case of Switzerland. There are some exemptions. Not sure if there's any other product really. Okay, so what I introduce you to now is compliance requirements that apply on a federal level. What makes the US different from the European Union is that there's also state level regulations to take into consideration here. And I'm not going to go through all of them, that would take too much time. But just to demonstrate that you may also need to consider product compliance requirements on a state level. So most well known is arguably California Prop 65, which, similar to REACH in the EU, if you heard of that before, it restricts more than 800 substances, chemicals and heavy metals in consumer products sold in California. This includes lead, cadmium, phthalates, and so on. Third-party testing is required in order to verify compliance, and verifying compliance is required in order to not attach certain warning labels. That's how you can break this down. It's very simplified versions are exceptions, but broadly speaking, that is why lab testing is necessary. Now keep in mind there are substance restrictions in many other states, some which may only apply to certain product categories or certain substances. But yeah, CA Prop 65 is quite comprehensive. When it comes to packaging, there are restrictions in many US states concerning heavy metals. I can't remember the exact limitation. Is it 10 milligrams or something? And suffocation warning labels. There's also UPLA, the Uniform Product Labeling Act, which I think applies in 45 states. So some of these are, broadly, applies in a majority of US states. So is also the case with US law labeling requirements, which apply to certain stuff products, cushions, this armchair you see right here, and some variations between different states, but generally a do not remove statement. a URN number, company information, and also filling materials as a weight percentage. So how do you as a US importer keep track of these state regulations? My recommendation is that you always consult a qualified testing company to make an assessment on a case-by-case basis, more specifically a product basis. First, because there are different requirements that apply to different products, okay? But they also keep track, they stay up to date with new regulations or changes. This could mean that you take a regulation like CA Prop 65, California Proposition 65, it's been around since 70s or something, but they keep adding substances and they also adjust the limits. So a substance that was previously accepted up to a certain level could be they could reduce that level, it could be banned. So it's very, very difficult for you as an Amazon seller to keep track of this. Instead, it's far more effective to stay in touch with a testing company and follow the newsletter or even just have a contact person that you can reach out to. Okay. Now that you know the basics, and this is really just scratching the surface here today, maybe a little bit deeper than that, but now is the time to look into Amazon and the way they are, let's say, approaching this, to put it nicely. This is something that, you may have seen this before. This is a compliance request sent by Amazon. This is from late 2020 or early 2021. What they're saying here is that they are removing one or more product listings from this seller. This is sent from Amazon to a specific seller, just to be clear, as a result of reported product safety concerns. Please note that you will not be penalized for the first time cancellation of these listings, but they do prohibit relisting. Now, what is the issue here? They have suspended or removed this listing as a result of a safety concern report, and they now require that this seller provides a lab test report according to the appropriate UL voluntary standard for this product. They don't confirm, they don't tell you. In some cases, they don't tell you which specific UL standard apply, or any standard for that matter. That's up to a lab to decide. It also has to be issued by a ISO 17025 certified laboratory. Okay? Now you have 30 days to do this, or they will be permanently removed. So, what documents do they request? And this is just one example. The most common is that they want to see lab test reports. This can be triggered when you have a new listing. I think that's the more common, what we see more of these days. Could also be a situation in which they reach out to you 6 months later. It doesn't have to be the case that they reach out right now. They may require product certificates like the SDoc or the Children's Product Certificate, as I just mentioned. They may require product or packaging label files. That is to verify that the product and or the packaging are correctly labeled. And supplier invoices. We see less of that these days. So, number one, Amazon generally requires sellers to comply with the national or the state product regulations in the country where they are selling. You're selling in the US, you need to comply with US product compliance requirements. But as I just showed you, as I demonstrated on the previous slide or 2 slides back, Amazon can and have the right to go beyond that. They can say that we want to see a UL test report, for example, even though UL is, in theory anyway, voluntary. Okay? Now, there's no way around this. Failing to provide any compliance documents or any photo evidence of labels means that your product will be removed permanently. And they're only getting stricter. We are seeing Amazon, well, if you go back a few years, Amazon was primarily concerned with anything for children. We saw the same pattern in the US and in the EU. Now we have seen how they are expanding compliance checks to, say, well, products that broadly be considered to be more harmless, like jewelry for, well, adults. The thing is that it's often too late to try to sort out the mess when you receive a message like this. It's you have 30 days and to arrange lab testing and all of that stuff, issue certificates, and even learn about the process in just a month. It's not enough time. But not just that, if you shipped a product that is incorrectly labeled to an Amazon warehouse, you can't get it relabeled. They're not going to do it for you. That means your product is inherently, technically non-compliant. So this is something you need to get a grip on before you ship products. Okay, this headline is a bit covered by my camera here. Can I get these documents from my supplier? That would be the ultimate shortcut, to just get these documents from the supplier instead. Well, the thing is that very few manufacturers in Asia can provide full compliance documents. And those that can are already selling their own products on Amazon. Thing is that Amazon, well, factories in China or Vietnam or elsewhere, they are not compliance consultants. They don't have compliance consultants on their team. Okay? Just the way they don't help their customers with marketing. They see it as their responsibility. If they would go through all the trouble and the cost to ensure compliance, with lab testing and all of that stuff, then they are better off just, selling the products on their own. And if they are that sophisticated that they can actually pull this off, they can manage the compliance process on their own, then why even bother with selling to Amazon sellers in the first place? So it is important to understand that dynamic. Okay. Now, using supplier test reports is also very problematic, because there are many situations in which, okay, you reach out, you ask a supplier, hey, can you send me a test report for this product? What's often happening is that you get a random, unverifiable test report from a say, recognized testing company for a completely different product, okay? You have a test report, everything must line up. The SKU, the product photo. You can't say that, okay, I'm selling widget A, so I'm going to show a test report on widget C. That's something Amazon will, of course, they will not let that pass. And there's also plenty of fake and completely invalid product certificates and so on floating around on the internet. So be very careful before you just submit something that you get from your supplier. You better be certain that what you have received is valid. So what does Amazon do in order to verify compliance? It's a bit redundant, but why not go through this again? They request lab test reports, they request self-issued compliance documents, they may request supplier invoices. And where do sellers fail? Well, many sellers, they panic, they reach out to the supplier, they receive some sort of weird test report from some strange company and submit a test report for a similar product or even a different supplier. That means that the SKU and the product name don't add up. Another mistake is to provide compliance documents that don't match the test report, that you have a self-issued CPC or an SDoc and is not supported by the test report. Or the worst of all is to expect the supplier to have your back when this happens, because that's just not the case. They don't have the expertise to arrange lab testing or much less to create compliance documents or correct labels. Okay, so let's look at this from a practical supply chain perspective. So the very first thing you need to do, and this is at a product development stage, is to confirm the regulations that apply to your products. The second thing you need to do is to confirm the specific product standards. Could be UL, ASTM, IEC, ISO, and so on, that apply to the product, and also substance restrictions. These are often part of a reference to some extent in, say, CPSAA or the various FDA or the FCC rules, for example. So they go hand in hand. Number 3, confirm product and labeling requirements. Also create label files and submit to your supplier. You need to actually create the label files, send them to your supplier. You need to be very hands-on. You can't just tell them, hey, you need to put up a country of origin label here. Now, you need to be very, very specific. Give them the file, tell them where to print it. You need to confirm documentation requirements and issue the documents that are required. This often means just putting it together based on a template and just printing it and keeping it in case anyone would ask, such as Amazon or the CPSC. 5, confirm lab testing requirements and also decide when lab testing should and, well, must take place. There are requirements for that too. In some cases, you need to get testing arranged before production, but in some cases, it's mandatory to get lab testing done on batch samples, meaning the final product. That product samples, the pre-production samples, will not do in those cases. And the last, well, number 6 here, do you need any permit or approval, registration, for example? That can be the case for certain products, medical devices, and so on. We don't cover that. I have very limited expertise outside of consumer products, but it could be a requirement, and it is a requirement, at least for wooden products. Okay. So that's everything in this tutorial. If you have questions about today's topics, you can send an email to info@compliancegate.com or visit compliancegate.com, which is our website. Thank you.